people on the left, they paint a very hyperbolic and alarmist vision of race relations in America. I mean, the NAACP says that Florida is hostile to black people, right? And we can acknowledge the problems that still exist without pretending like enormous progress hasn't been made.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Politics Podcast. I'm Hannah Cox with Brad Polumbo. This week, Tim Scott versus the women on The View. A meta-analysis shows lockdowns failed, base Ted Cruz, randomly, and so much more. Let's jump in. So you guys, Brad and I have a pretty happy podcast marriage. We get along swimmingly most of the time.
But not today.
Yeah, not today. We're fighting today. Not really.
So we're fighting because Hannah has a truly terrible take about something that is going on. There's basically big news in the UFO world. So a former intelligence community insider is blowing the whistle and saying that because we already know that UFOs are real. What we don't know is what they are. And he's telling News Nation and other media outlets, and actually reported to Congress as a whistleblower, that the UFOs have been recovered. And he also says that we have alien bodies that have been recovered. And Hannah's like, LOL, don't care. Which, A, it's so exciting and cool, so I don't know how you could not care. But two, the government has been lying to us for decades about the UFO program. And yet that's the kind of thing that normally you're all over, but you just don't care.
I really can't explain it. I mean, I think I just assume the government is lying to us about everything, but I guess on the list of things I think it's lying about, aliens are so low down on my priority list. I don't care if they're here and they're gonna make themselves known, like, go ahead and get it over with. I don't think they are. I don't know. I really did search them myself to try to find a spark of interest, something that would make me even want to look into this more, listen to the interview you sent me. Can't get it together.
Let us know in the comments if you're interested in it, and maybe I'll do a solo segment on it if enough people are interested.
I think you should do a solo segment where I sit here and you try to preach to me and convince me to care about any of this. And we'll see if I can find it within me. But anyways, guys, let Brad know if you're interested. He needs an outlet. I needed an outlet to talk about Vanderpump Rules. He needs an outlet to talk about aliens. I'm not going to be able to fill that void for him because I don't care. What I do care about is that I think dog parks are going to have to be off the table for me moving forward. And you guys know I just got Phoenix about 8 months ago, or he's 8 months old now. And we rely heavily on a dog park that's near us. We have a nice big greenway we can walk on. We go to the dog park probably 3 to 4 times a week. He's not super over the top energetic, but he does need to get some energy out and play at least, for about 20, 30 minutes a day. So the dog park's nice because you can kind of just go and he does his thing and he runs himself out and then he's just calm and quiet at home. But we've had 2 bad incidents at the dog park over the past week, and I think it's game over. One, he got attacked by another dog. And when I tell you that I went mama bear full crazy, level 15, I ripped this dog off him. I launched it through the air. It was a husky. It was not a dog. I picked that dog up and catapulted it across the dog park. And then I yelled at its owner. I was like, your dog needs a muzzle. And I do not understand why people who have dogs that they know are aggressive bring them to dog parks. Get out. I was ready to go because, it really could have hurt him. It was trying to bite his neck. It had him on the ground and was going for his neck. It was not playing. And I could have been hurt trying to get your stupid dog off mine. So that was traumatizing. But then also Phoenix was the bad guy at the dog park, and another incident where he's not fixed yet because increasingly the breeder, who's very involved, he comes from a line of show dogs. Phoenix's dad is actually the number 2 Samoyed in the country. So he's kind of royalty in the Samoyed world, but they've been telling me that prevailing science is no longer that you should neuter or fix your dogs under 18 months old. The vet also told me that. So he's not fixed yet, but he I guess I can't say the word without us getting demonetized, but he committed an act of violence against another dog. And it's very embarrassing to have a dog that is a sexual predator. I'll just leave it at that. And I don't know that I can show my face there again, even though the other dog seemed to like it. It tried to leave with us, but still, I didn't want to see that. I don't want him doing that. He's too young. And so I think dog parks are off the table and I'm gonna have to start running or something with him. And that sucks.
That is, yeah. Luckily, Reggie is doesn't like other dogs, so we just never go to dog parks. But
You lucked out on that one. Well, let's get into another dog fight. There was an episode of The View this week. Neither you or I watch The View, but we do occasionally catch clips from The View as they circulate online. And occasionally it is a highly entertaining show because they don't do it very often, but every now and then they slip somebody in who actually has a different viewpoint than the women at the table, which is most of what the show is made up of, is just a bunch of like cackling hens, like regurgitating opinions and agreeing with one another. But Tim Scott, who is a senator from South Carolina, was on The View this week. And Brad, I don't know where you stand on Tim Scott. I really like Tim Scott, as do most people in South Carolina. He is revered across the board. I don't agree with him on a lot of his social policies. There's a number of policies that I'm just not with him on. So he's not somebody that I get like excited about as a politician, but as a person, I think he's really quality and has high character. And he will break with the GOP in very interesting and based ways, like when he speaks out against police brutality, racial profiling. His personal testimony on those things has done a lot to move conservatives and evangelicals. I've seen it firsthand. So I think he's pretty brave in some ways that I admire. But he brought that energy to The View over the past couple of days. And I think this was something that was sort of a long time coming. They've had some things to say about him.
yeah, so Joy Behar and the other hosts on The View a couple weeks ago had some not so nice things to say about him, pushing back on his argument that he is, the story of America, shows how you can overcome barriers and is a success story. They said he's an exception, not the rule. Take a listen to what they had to say.
And he's one of these guys who, he's like Clarence Thomas, black Republican who believes in pulling yourself by your bootstraps, rather than, to me, understanding the systemic racism that African Americans face in this country and other minorities. He doesn't get it, neither does Clarence.
Right.
And that's why they're Republicans.
Yeah.
So Tim Scott didn't take too kindly to this lecture from a white liberal woman that he just doesn't get systemic racism. So he reached out to come on the show, and they had a really interesting exchange, which I thought he got the better of. Take a listen to this.
You have indicated that you don't believe in systemic racism. What is your definition of systemic racism?
Let me answer the question that you've answered.
Or does it even exist in your mind?
Let me answer the question this way. One of the things I think about, and one of the reasons why I'm on the show, is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule. That is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today, that the only way to succeed is by being the exception. I will tell you that if my life is the exception, I can't imagine.
But it is.
But it's not, actually. It's
been 114 years.
Yeah, so the fact of the matter is we've had an African-American president, African-American vice president. We've had 2 African-Americans to be secretaries of the state. In my home city, the police chief is an African-American who's now running for mayor. The head of the highway patrol for South Carolina is an African-American.
Still exceptions.
In 1975, there was about 15% employment in the African-American community. For the first time in the history of the country, it's under 5%.
40% homelessness.
And 50% of the folks in our community
get 13% of the population.
You had a chance to ask the question. I know that I've watched you on the show that you like people to be deferential and respectful, so I'm going to do the same thing.
True.
So here's what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to suggest the fact of the matter is that progress in America is palpable. It can be measured in generations. I look back at the fact that my grandfather, born in 1921 in Sally, South Carolina, when he was on a sidewalk, a white person was coming, he had to step off and not make eye contact. That man believed then, with some doubt now, in the goodness of America, because he believed that having faith in God, faith in himself, and faith in what the future could hold for his kids would unleash opportunities in ways that you cannot imagine. Every kid today can look, just change the stations and see how much progress has been made in this country. ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, CNN, Fox News all have African-American and Hispanic hosts. So what I'm suggesting is that the yesterday's exception is today's rule. And for us to suggest...
America has met its promise.
No, of course, the concept of America is that we are going to become a more perfect union. That in fact, the challenges that we face 50 years ago and 60 years ago should not be the same challenges that we face today. And here's the way that you measure that. When my mother was born, about 10% of African Americans got a high school degree, diploma. Today, it's over 90%. When you look at the income, success that we've had.
That's an HBCU stat.
Well, listen, HBCU stat is a good one, because one of the reasons why I took the funding for HBCUs to the highest level in the history of the country, and then I helped make it permanent, is because I believe that education is the closest thing to magic in America. So I'm about making sure that our kids have as many opportunities to succeed as possible. It's one of the reasons why
I need an opportunity to succeed because I have to go to they're begging.
We have more time, though.
They're begging. You're coming.
I'm just getting started.
I know.
I believe all people can see the success that I've had.
We'll be right back.
Okay.
I'm sorry I had.
So 2 things I really liked about that. One is his demeanor. I just think he comes off really well there. He's forceful, he's strong, he doesn't let them interrupt him, but he's not like hostile and angry and shouting. So I just think I would love to see more of that kind of assertive but not nasty rhetorical style in our politics. And 2, I just think he makes a very good point, because people on the left, they paint a very hyperbolic and alarmist vision of race relations in America. I mean, the NAACP says that Florida is hostile to Black people, right? And we can acknowledge the problems that still exist without pretending like enormous progress hasn't been made and like America is still not one of the most racially diverse and tolerant countries in the world. I think we should be able to do both, but that kind of victim narrative that Tim Scott rejects, but the host of The View were pushing there, actually holds us back and harms us from having that conversation, honestly.
It is poisonous to preach a victim mentality to people who are minorities. And I can say that as a woman. I'm surrounded by women who have bought into that bogus mentality. I can see it in multiple people that I've met amongst people of color populations. It is poisonous. It is something that is detrimental to you mentally to buy into, and it's absolutely false. I love how he pushes back on it, because I think 2 things can be true. America can still have some systemic racism within it, which I've pointed to in things like the public education system, criminal justice system, gun laws. I think that's fair game. But to pretend there have been no gains made, to pretend that things are getting worse and not so much better, and to pretend that America is this hellhole compared to the rest of the world is abjectly false. And it's a ruinous mentality, and it's a ruinous thing to preach to people. I think that he has a much better way of looking at it, which is that you need to compare things to how they were a generation ago. I often do that. I think it's a good thing for people to look at. Where was your dad at a year ago? Where were your grandparents at a generation or 2 ago? And then look at how far we've come. Look at how far you've come. Look at how many more opportunities you have. Look at how much better things are getting around you, because they are getting better. Racial relations are getting better. Views towards LGBTQ people, they are getting better. Views towards women are improving. And to negate that is, I think, intentionally manipulative of people. I think that there's an alternate agenda there when people do that. It's not something that helps people. We need more people like Tim Scott out here in politics in general, who instead of saying, you should hate one another, you should want to own the other side, or instead of saying you are oppressed, poor you need the government to come in and take care of you, and say, no, actually, you have a ton of opportunities. Things are getting better. We can keep improving. We can see the gains we've made and keep on that trajectory and intentionally keep building a better world. And it's much more aspirational and optimistic than most of what you hear out there. So I thought he just beast moded this interview.
Oh, yeah, I thought he did great. I will say I think it's great to see more diverse voices being on The View. A lot of Republicans have been on there in recent weeks. I think that's great. I think we need more dialogue. One of the great things about The View in the past was it truly had the exchange of ideas, right? They would debate things. It would get hot, and maybe they weren't always doing it in a civil and substantive manner. But it's unfortunate when those kinds of platforms don't have that back and forth increasingly, because it's important, and you need to have people see different sides of perspectives, see, oh, that's what a Republican it looks like, not just this caricature of how people describe the other side. Same with Democrats and on other media networks. I think it's important that Fox News regularly interviews Democrats and Democrat elected officials, so its viewers can see them like for themselves rather than just whatever caricature they'll see portrayed by them by their critics, which is important but isn't enough to have a good understanding of people. And then you end up thinking, like, you see these polls where when you ask Republican people just in the public to what do Democrats believe, they think that Democrats believe much more extreme things than Democrats actually do when they're polled, and vice versa. Democrats think Republicans believe much more extreme things than they actually do when they're polled. So both sides misunderstand each other. And this kind of conversation, I think, does a lot to help ameliorate that divide.
I think that's totally true. I think losing Meghan McCain on The View was a huge loss for them, even though Meghan is not where I am on things like foreign policy. She actually would fight back and push, more of a moderate Republican mentality, which to people on the far left is radically right. So I think you're so correct in identifying that we need to be hearing one another more. This is something I've pointed to for some time within our country and our system that is so problematic, which is that we don't know people who are different than us on any level, right? Not just when it comes to politics, when it comes to religion, when it comes to socioeconomic status, when it comes to nationality, when it comes to, what school you went to, on and on the list goes. You were surrounded by homogeny, even though we live in a very diverse melting pot. And the more we can do to break out of that, I think the fewer straw man arguments you'll see. I think the less stereotyping you'll see. And I think the better things like racial relations and the bigotry that does remain will be addressed. And so I love to see him do this. One thing, though, that just deeply bothered me, and he didn't speak to this, I don't think, that I saw in the clips I've watched, but I wish somebody would say these things to their face. What Joy Behar said about him before he went on the show was incredibly racist. And that narrative and that sort of dialogue is so prevalent on the left, where when somebody disagrees with you ideologically, it is fair game. One, she lumps all Black Republican men into a bucket, right? She says he's basically just Clarence Thomas, probably that's the only other Black Republican she knows of, and says that they have the same ideas. That's bogus. They are not one and the same. They have some differentiation in things that they believe. And then she says they both believe in this, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing. And you can believe in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps while acknowledging that there are obstacles. There's nothing racist about believing that people can overcome whatever circumstances they're born into, certainly in the US more so than many other places. But instead, she, puts that down. She tries to make that sound like a dirty way of thinking about things, and that you just don't care about the plight of poor people or people who are suffering or other Black people because you've made it and you're a Republican now. And like basically tries to call them Uncle Toms without saying it, because she would get in trouble for using that term. But what she's, invoking here is that same mentality and way of looking at people who think differently than you. And I think it's disgusting. And I'm so tired of white progressive women thinking it's okay to speak about Black people in this manner.
All right. Well, in other news, a big meta-analysis just came out of a British economic think tank reviewing the efficacy of COVID lockdowns and all the government restrictions on our liberties that were subjected to us in the name of stopping the spread. And guess what, Hannah? It turns out they didn't work so great.
Shocker. Can't believe it. No, I'm overwhelmed lately with this feeling of, and I'm not even that deeply entrenched in the right, but as somebody who's grown up around the right and homeschooled and all these things, I'm often painted with the conspiracy theorists and the fringe people and the people who don't believe in science and the people who don't actually teach their kids to read. And these are the kinds of insults you face all the time being on the right. And yet we are just over and over and over proven to be correct, proven to be more accurate than the quote, quote experts in our analysis of virtually everything. Like, not just when it comes to COVID, but when it comes to things like I was listening to this podcast this morning about reading standards, and that's a whole other tangent. But we've been saying for a while you should use phonetics to teach. And the left has been like, no, use sight reading and feel good vibes and the joy of reading to teach. And guess what? Reading's plummeting. And homeschoolers who you like to make fun of as being illiterate have been right all along. Same energy applies to COVID, and it's frankly becoming exhausting, because being right over and over again is not fun when there are such massive costs that come with nobody listening to you, no matter how often you are correct. So people predicted this, rightfully so. It was common sense that locking people in their homes would not save lives, would not prevent the spread of COVID, and would have much worse repercussions than the actual disease itself. And yet, it didn't matter. Groupthink took over. We were in lockstep. They had the media. They had the power of the government, and it still happened. And there will be no repercussions for any of it.
Hey guys, Brad here. I just want to make sure you're staying in the loop on all things space politics. We've also got 2 new shows you should check out. One is my new show, Damage Control, where I'm teaming up with right-of-center LGBT guests to restore sanity on these increasingly unhinged issues. Then there's Hannah's show, Propaganda, where she's reacting to videos of police brutality and exposing the systemic flaws in the U.S. criminal justice system. Check these all out on our individual Facebook and YouTube pages. And remember, Base Politics is a nonprofit organization, so you can help us move the culture through content by going to base-politics.com and donating today. Well, hopefully we can at least learn our lesson and not repeat these mistakes again, because this new meta-analysis out of the IEA in the UK by Drs. Jonas Herby, Lars Jonung, and Professor Steve Henke finds that basically the COVID lockdowns compares them to a scenario in which, like what Sweden did, which was very minor government restrictions and then extensive public health information and awareness campaigns to allow people to make voluntary decisions. And when it turns out, when you compare these two things, all the lockdowns, all the stringent restrictions, they reduced mortality by about 3.2%. compared to the less restrictive approach of a Sweden or something. So in the US, that would mean it prevented 4,000 deaths. Now we have to go back and compare that to the Imperial College model that was used to sell us on lockdowns that said they would save 2 million lives in the United States. Seems like a small rounding error there, a little bit of a mistake. And then you have to compare that 4,000 lives that may have been saved to all the consequences the lockdowns had, from the mass unemployment to skyrocketing drug overdoses and mental health issues to the domestic violence hotlines ringing off the hook to all these social ills that had lethal consequences in many cases, all for something that essentially did not work. Obviously, 4,000 lives is important. Those people are important. But in the grand scheme of the pandemic, that's a very small amount. And it pales in comparison to the lives lost in consequence of these restrictions. And so they conclude that the COVID-19 lockdowns were a global policy failure of gigantic proportions that failed to significantly reduce deaths while imposing substantial social, cultural, and economic costs. And this is not just one outlier study. This is a meta-analysis that reviewed 19,646 potentially relevant studies, picked 22 that really honed in on the data, and then did a meta-analysis of all these studies. It's been peer-reviewed. I mean, to me, this really is the gold standard of research, and it's really undeniable at this point that this stuff failed.
Yeah. And I think what is so interesting to me is I listened to this podcast called Hidden Brain, free advertising right here. I think it's one of the most valuable podcasts out there. And they had a whole episode shortly as the pandemic was arriving on our shores about how other countries have dealt with other pandemics in the past and what worked and what didn't. And their top finding was that the best thing a government could do in the face of these kinds of tragedies and situations was to ensure that they were giving the people rapid communication, that they were updating them as information changed, that they were keeping sort of a loose fist, not trying to centrally plan or tell people exactly what to do. They were just disseminating information as fast as they could gather it about what the disease entailed, what they thought were the best ways to combat it, and then letting people do what was best for them in a very laissez-faire type way. You can go back and listen to that episode. I wrote an article about their data from that episode, I think in March or April of 2020. And yet we did the exact opposite here in the US. We tried to rule with an iron fist. We made information very difficult to come by. We put out from our federal agencies a lot of actual misinformation. We stymied the free market responding to the disease by limiting testing. There were all kinds of missteps that we made. We did basically everything you should not do in the face of a pandemic. And to be quite clear, we did it for very political, calculated reasons that did not have anything to do with actually protecting lives. They just didn't. Sweden, it's interesting to me, did get it mostly right all along. And it's so funny that the left loves to point to Sweden as this model we should follow, except for when it comes to things that they do like this, or except for when it comes to how free market they actually are and how they limit regulations, and except for when it comes to how they block unions from lobbying the government. On and on it goes, right? They want to point to Sweden, except for all the areas where Sweden does everything radically different than how how they want to do it. So I am not surprised to find any of this. And I think that while 4,000 lives is nothing to write off, their calculations that it saved about 4,000 American lives, I don't think that we can empirically, I guess, gather just how many lives were cost, right? It's sort of the broken window fallacy of
But I
Austrian
think we can
economics.
sure as heck say it's a lot more than
It's a lot
4,000.
more. And that it's going to be ongoing, because the ramifications of taking away people's communities, of forcing them into substance abuse, of pushing a loneliness epidemic, the suicides that have come and will continue to come from that, the deaths by addiction that have come and will continue to come, the domestic violence numbers, which you pointed to, the loss of academic achievement, those can actually create very lifelong consequences, including poverty, which can cause much earlier deaths. The list goes on and on. I think we can certainly guess that more than 4,000 lives were taken by these policies. But we'll never, it's sort of like when you look at gun data, they'll always elevate the number of people who were killed by a gun every year. They never actually go back and report the number of lives that were saved by guns every year. And I think this is a similar problem where you're not going to see anybody in the mainstream media really championing this kind of information and calling for a reckoning on revitalizing how we would address these things if they were to happen again, right? This kind of massive calamity should come with very serious policy reform. It should come with much stricter protocols for government and how they can operate in these sorts of instances. And I'm really disappointed in people on the left for dropping the ball here, because I think the right really did do a very good job of rising up and pushing back against COVID Inc. for 3 years. And had it not been for a lot of people who were just flat out unwilling to comply with nonsense, they would have gone a lot further and done a lot more and wreaked even greater havoc than they did. But the right did, rise and actually rally to push back on some of their worst ideas, including things like vaccine mandates. The left, however, just completely dropped the ball on human rights, on civil liberties, on basic principles of freedom. And even to this day, seems to have no interest in looking back and discovering where they went wrong and trying to ensure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. There's no interest from Democrat lawmakers in pushing for investigations into COVID's origins. I think it's disgusting. And I know it's really hard when you've been in the wrong and you've been complicit with perpetrating harm against people to recognize it and want to change. This is something the Stoics talked about a lot with Nero, and how few people would rise up to push back against him. And you had one or two, people who've been close to him after decades finally did recognize and start working to overthrow him. But most of the people still went along with it because it was easier to ignore the harm you'd perpetrated than to say, I've made a huge mistake, I've participated in something terrible, and now I'm going to work to remedy it, or to at least try to stop the bleeding. And the unfortunate thing is that most people's human nature is so unexamined. They're so unself-aware that they don't ever do that. They don't hold themselves to account, and they will do anything to prevent having to look in the mirror and recognize their own fault.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. It's like this sunk cost fallacy. When you've invested so much into something, you just become more and more determined to cling to it, because if you admit you're wrong, you have to admit all the past things you did and all the harm it caused. And so you have a strong psychological incentive to only seek out information that confirms you were right, and to push away information that suggests otherwise. And that's why I think we'll see this study echoed throughout right-wing media. And I imagine we'll see it, if not blacked out, largely overlooked and under-discussed by left-of-center establishment media outlets, because they don't want their own records examined on pushing for this stuff. So it's a real shame.
Hey guys, Hannah here. Big things are happening at Base Politics, and we want to make sure you stay in the loop with all of our productions and developments. If you like the Base Politics podcast, you can find it every Wednesday morning on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Brad's YouTube. If you want to support the show, be sure to join the Base Politics Locals channel, where you can help produce it for only $5 a month. You can also catch our new shows, Propaganda and Damage Control, every Saturday on our respective YouTubes and Facebook channels. On Damage Control, Brad teams up with right-of-center LGBT guests to restore sanity to the increasingly unhinged debate over these issues. And on Propaganda, I'm taking video footage of police behaving badly every week and using those videos to expose problems within U.S. policing and the laws that guide it. Remember, Base Politics is a nonprofit organization dedicated to moving the culture through content. If you want to be a part of these efforts, you can donate to fund our work at base-politics.com.
But with that, let's move on to our quick hit segment. And up first, we have based Ted Cruz.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I did not have Ted Cruz going based for gay people and standing up to a lunatic pastor on my bingo card for June 2023, the year of our Lord, but I opened Twitter this morning and that's what was going down. So I've always said I'll give credit where it's due. So this actually started a few days ago where Ted Cruz initially started speaking out against a law in Uganda.
Yeah, so this is a Uganda law. We've got some reporting from the New York Times here. The president of Uganda signed a punitive anti-gay bill on Monday that includes the death penalty, enshrining into law an intensifying crackdown against LGBTQ people in the conservative East African nation, and dismissing widespread calls not to impose one of the world's most restrictive anti-gay measures. The law calls for life imprisonment for anyone who engages in gay sex. Anyone who tries to have same-sex relations could be liable for up to a decade in prison. The law also decrees the death penalty for anyone convicted of quote-unquote aggravated homosexuality, a term defined as acts of same-sex relations with children or disabled people, comma, those carried out under threat or while someone is unconscious. The offense of attempted aggravated homosexuality carries a sentence of up to 14 years. So, Ted Cruz, not exactly known as a gay rights icon, but he tweeted out, "This Uganda law is horrific and wrong. Any law criminalizing homosexuality or imposing the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality is grotesque and an abomination. All civilized nations should join together in condemning this human rights abuse." Now, he ended up getting backlash for this take, which kind of surprised me, but kind of didn't, because there's always crazy people on the internet. One thing I did say is I don't think he realized that aggravated homosexuality included child abuse, because I imagine he would support the death penalty for that. So I think that's a point some of his critics pointed to, which is fair. But he's speaking out against the law criminalizing homosexuality and punishing it with life in prison. And that should not have prompted backlash from anyone, but apparently one big pastor and a bunch of other critics, but especially this one pastor, really pushed back on Ted for this, right?
Yeah, so that's what happened this morning. It was a pastor out of Florida. This guy has almost 50,000 followers on Twitter. You hate to see it. I would like to think these kinds of people are just fringe lunatics, but they have people that follow them and listen to them. He says to Ted, "Go tell it to God, Ted." And then he quotes Leviticus. He says, "If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them." Leviticus 20:13. So he's highlighting a law within the Bible that is advocating for putting gay people to death. And then he said, was this law God gave to his old covenant people horrific and wrong? Yeah, I would say it is. And it's one reason even Christians don't elevate this verse and try to focus more on the New Testament. Because guess what? The Old Testament has some crazy stuff within it. And most people recognize that that was replaced by Jesus being born. Even within Christianity, it's very, you've got some denominations that will still say kind of a convoluted mashup of like, well, some parts of the Old Testament still stand, but some were replaced by Jesus. But most Christians like me would say Jesus replaced the Old Testament. The Old Testament was a set of laws given to the Israelites to live with under. And even then, it was bad. And if you don't have some questions about some of that, like I have had to do with my religion, you need to, put your thinking cap on a little bit harder. That's a
even Ted pointed this out in his replies, right?
Yeah. So Ted actually came back at him. And I thought, Ted's a smart guy. And it's important to remember that because he can be a little griftery. He can definitely play to the base. But this guy's a Harvard law graduate. He's no sucker. And he turns out he does know the Bible pretty good. I think his dad is actually a pastor as well. So he brought that energy in his reply. He said, part one, "Pastor, I don't know you, but I honor your ministry. Your biblical analysis is an error. Jesus told us to, quote, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's. We are talking the laws of man, not the Old Testament laws of God. Do you really believe that the U.S. government should execute every person who is gay?" And then he did a part two follow-up where he said, "Leviticus also tells us for anyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Should the government execute every child who's disrespectful to his parents? That ignores grace and the New Testament as our Savior taught us. Jesus said, 'Let he that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone.'" And so I thought this was, a very graceful way of handling this. I probably would have gone for the throat because this man is literally trying to advocate for, killing gay people and using the Bible to do it. It's not the first time I've seen the Bible used to justify horrific things in both the present day and in days of old, where they used to use it to justify things like slavery. But I don't know. It's just sort of the audacity of something like this in 2023 to come online and write it and not fear any kind of backlash for saying that. That should really tell you something about how insulated some of these communities are. But Ted's absolutely right. Not only as far as how Christians should think about this and how the grace in the New Testament replaced the old, but also as far as like there is a separation of church and state, and you should want that if you were a Christian. You should not be advocating for the government to take your rando Old Testament laws and put them into place to govern people. Being a Christian is a choice. God gives you free will. If you choose to live under these laws and submit yourselves to them, go for it. You have no right to try to push them on other people or force other people to adopt them and how they govern a society. And if you try to do that, you're really very, very foolish, because you open the door, you set the legal precedent for allowing the government to use any religion to come in and govern other people. And I don't think you'd like it if all of a sudden Christians were in the minority, which, by the way, is rapidly becoming the truth, because more and more people are leaving Christianity due to crud like this. And all of a sudden Muslims are the majority, or Buddhists are the majority, or whatever other religion is out there is the majority. And all of a sudden they're using the precedent you sat to put their laws in place and govern you. You wouldn't like it, so don't do it to other people.
No, and I appreciate this from Ted Cruz. I think this really is the bare minimum. If you support freedom or limited government in any way, shape, or form, you have to oppose the criminalization of homosexuality. But you do have people, I mean, it's hard to tell how widespread they really are, because Twitter can be not representative of the public. There is polling on this, and obviously almost all Republicans would not support this still. This kind of crazy criminalizing homosexuality. The aggravated homosexuality part gets a little muddied, because it's like they're mislabeling that. That doesn't have anything to do with homosexuality. These things they're
right. Would they not execute you if you molested a child, no matter what gender you are?
Yeah, right. It's that shouldn't
or what
be
sexual orientation. What?
Correct. You're right. And so I think people who are trying to seize on that are being too clever by half. But yeah, look, it's just sad to me that this is like a stance that for a politician to take. They have to get flack. Like, I mean, that really is evidence to me of some backsliding on these issues, because President Trump, when he was in office, launched an international diplomatic initiative to lobby for the decriminalization of homosexuality abroad, spearheaded by Rick Grinnell, who was the first Senate-confirmed cabinet-level official who was openly gay and served in the Trump administration. So everyone thought that was good. I mean, I went on the Glenn Beck radio show to discuss that, and he, despite being, a devout Mormon who thinks being gay is a sin, agrees that it should absolutely not be a crime, and he supported that initiative, and we came together on that. And so it's sad to think that we've perhaps even just backslid from when we were a few years ago.
I don't think I would look at it that way. I think Trump was just a massive exception to many, many things, where he could get away with things other people on the right cannot. I think that
the party went along with it.
The party went along with it, but I was going to say, I think for two reasons. One, Trump was crazy, and if you didn't go along with what he was saying, he was going to come for your throat, and then his whole base would turn against you. So nobody pushed back on Trump about very much on the right, period. But I also think there's this really pervasive mentality across, I think, everybody in politics, where as long as somebody can be doing things that you don't unilaterally like, but as long as most of what they're doing is stuff that you really feel like is standing up for you and like they have your back, then you're going to turn a blind eye to it. And I think with Trump, I know many within the evangelical world, he did many things that were against their religion, and they didn't care. They didn't care because he was pro getting rid of abortion, and because he'd say nice things about Christians publicly. And that's really all it took, right? They didn't need a whole lot more than that. Christians have this real victim mentality themselves. I've grown up around it, where they always think they're oppressed. They always think they're marginalized. They think that they're like the poor little people that are getting bullied. And it's like, no, you guys have had the majority for decades and have used it to push your views on other people. Like, what are you talking about, where you feel like you don't have this representation and you need a strong man? But they do. That's why you'll see if a D-list celebrity comes out and says anything about Jesus, they're just like, oh my God, Kirk Cameron, DJ from Full House, we'll pay you $10,000 to come speak at our church because you're famous and you like us. You have to be there to know what I'm talking about, but trust me, it's very present.
All right. Well, up next, we've got to talk about white women, because at least a handful of them are out of control. a organized protest of hundreds of white women called Here for the Kids recently showed up to boycott and sit in at the Capitol in Colorado, lobbying to, according to CNN's reporting, use their quote-unquote privilege in a sit-in to demand that Governor Jared Polis ban guns and create a presumably mandatory gun buyback program. Not to like these piecemeal gun control efforts that we see from Democrats across the country. They literally were like, we demand that he ban all guns via executive order. And of course, the governor responded that that is not constitutional, but they wanted to Here for the Kids is a movement created after a mass shooting in Nashville in March that includes, it calls for primarily white women to peacefully sit in until Polis, who's the governor, signs an executive order banning guns. It was founded by two women of color, including Syra Rao of internet infamy, who is South Asian American, and Tina Strawn, who is black. Both are mothers. And Strawn told CNN the movement calls for white women to be at the forefront of the sit-in because we know what happens when we show up with demands. We're always the ones whose bodies are in the most danger and at the most risk. So it appealed to me very much that this was actually a time where we are asking black folks and other marginalized and vulnerable communities to sit this one out and allow the white women and their privileged bodies, their privilege and their power to show up. It's time for them to show up. And of course, the movement has garnered support from the entertainment industry, including white actresses Amy Schumer, Michelle Watkins, and Lake Bell. Look, yikes, is all I have to say.
I mean, I am a white woman, but I have to admit, white women are increasingly becoming a menace in our society, and I anticipate we're one step away from these people like taking off their shirts and like sitting in the Capitol. What's your plan? You're going to take your Karen energy and harass people until they violate the Constitution, and then it's going to go through the courts and get thrown out anyways. Like I can't stand activists who don't even take the time to understand basic public policy, rule of law, and how to do things and what's within like the actual potential for you to achieve when it comes to how you want to move things forward in the country. This is just, they're asshats. I mean, they look like clowns. It's so ridiculous. This isn't how you get things done. You don't have realistic policy goals in mind. And boy, you want to talk about privilege? I can't imagine being so privileged as to not only care about being able to defend myself with a gun, but to have the audacity to tell other people that they don't need the right to defend themselves with a gun. You have to be so insulated from issues.
Yeah, you live in a nice gated community in a safe suburb with police that are 2 minutes away and very well funded. So I understand, Susan, that you don't feel you need a firearm for self-defense. But I also find this whole thing so racially divisive. Like, oh, white women need to stand up and do their part and use their privileged bodies and all this nonsense. It's like all these women of color could have protested. Nothing would have happened to them either. Gun control protests happen all the time peacefully. The governor's literally a Democrat. I mean, he's not going to arrest them or punish them or anything. It's just the whole thing is so silly and nonsensical and absurd. Especially because they don't even actually believe that it will work. So Syra Rao, who's one of the people, admitted in this CNN article, state legislation does not work. Why? Because guns can cross state lines. You can print guns on 3D printers. State legislation is not working. It's just not working. It doesn't matter what it is. So that is a quote from the same woman organizing a sit-in at the Capitol demanding state action to ban the guns.
They're virtue signaling and they're fundraising. Let's be honest, they're fundraising. I mean, this is just such a complete clown show, like I said. And I've been in these rooms, I've been in these diversity trainings, I've sat through it where they basically want white people and especially white women to just come out and like self-flagellate themselves and have all this guilt and remorse and like take on all these burdens. And I mean, I think these people are well-meaning, but I think they're absolutely cracked. And I think that they are being used as pawns. Thank God. I mean, Jared Polis, I see a lot of people in the Libertarian Party criticize him. I don't get it. He is a Democrat, and for sure he does things I don't like as a Democrat. But as a whole, I would argue he's still the most libertarian governor in the country. I can't think of a Republican who's more libertarian than him in that role at the moment. And I love what he said about this. I think that it's just sort of common sense. And that is, common sense is leaving the left. They are completely ruled by feelings and emotions and just PR stunts versus actually trying to engage in meaningful policy reform, having conversations. Not that I in any way condone this or want to see this happen, but the reality is if they were smarter, they probably could get more gun control done in the country, because I think there are a number of people in the middle and on the right who would agree to things like red flag laws and things of that nature. Again, I don't support that at all. Just talking strategy here. But if you were to go about this in a smarter way, I think you could get things like that done, especially in purple states like Colorado. But they don't actually intend to get things done, is what I'm left with, is they just really aren't. That's not the end goal, because if it was, you'd be doing things much differently. Well, speaking of gun control, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was recently asked a question about the Hunter Biden Second Amendment defense plan, and she couldn't answer it. Let's roll this clip.
Should someone who's a drug user be able to possess a firearm?
I'm not going to get into tit for tat on this. I'm just not going to. Go ahead.
So basically, she was being asked about whether or not Hunter Biden's lawyers, which is Joe Biden's son, may pursue a Second Amendment defense if he ends up being charged for buying a handgun while using crack cocaine. So they were saying, should drug users be able to possess firearms? And she basically wouldn't answer it, which I think is so interesting, because it gets into this hot mess of a metric circle where they need to talk about drug policy, they need to talk about the Second Amendment, and they need to talk about the president's own son being involved in sort of this zone where he has been very punitive in the past.
Yeah, and this comes because Hunter Biden he faces a probe from the Justice Department right now over a handgun that he purchased in 2018, a time when he has admitted he was often using crack cocaine. Drug users are federally prohibited from owning guns, and this is reported by the Free Beacon. But lawyers for Biden told the Justice Department that they will point to the Second Amendment as defense for his purchase if he's charged, arguing that the prohibition on gun purchases for drug users is unconstitutional, because basically what happened is he admitted in his memoir that he was smoking crack every 15 minutes. That is a quote at the time. Yet on the gun purchase form, he said he was not a drug user. So he is dead to rights on a federal gun crime, which is pretty serious. And of course, the Biden administration has pushed for gun control, has defended a law that prohibits medical marijuana users from acquiring guns. And yet Hunter Biden's out here like, actually, Second Amendment should let me use crack cocaine and buy guns. And I find this very interesting because I'm of two minds on this. I'm torn. I don't think I support that law, but it bothers me that he hasn't been charged and arrested over it because he admitted to it. It's dead to rights, yet he's not getting it enforced against him so far, at least, because he's well connected and a child of privilege, where, a normal person who admitted openly to violating federal gun laws probably would be charged and might even go to jail for it. So I hate the double standard, the two-tier system of law for the elite and the little guy. That said, do I think drug use should disqualify you from your Second Amendment? No, I don't. But that is the law. So I kind of think, I don't know, like legally, it may be that there's long-standing precedent allowing the government to restrict drug users from owning guns. I don't really know what the precedent and the con law background there would be, but just on its merits, I certainly think this law is probably far too broad. But I have mixed feelings on it for the reasons I said.
Well, I don't have mixed feelings. I think the law is unequivocally wrong and immoral, but I can never claim to be merciful enough to not feel anything but sheer joy when people who have mandated these policies for other people have to face them themselves or see their loved ones face them, because that's usually the only time they finally recognize the wrong in their ways and turn around. Joe Biden has, through his policies and his advocacy, been responsible for countless people going to jail, being in jail and prison as we speak for this very thing. I saw Billy Binion from Reason Magazine actually this morning reporting on an update with the 6-year-old who shot his teacher recently. His mother is being charged because she legally bought marijuana. It was legal in her state, but she had legally bought marijuana and owned a gun in the home, and she's now being charged in a very similar circumstance. There are people who go to jail because they were using marijuana and were caught with a gun. Philando Castile was gunned down in broad daylight by a cop, and they used the excuse of him having maybe smoked marijuana sometime within the past 24 hours as an excuse for executing him for exercising his Second Amendment right. So people die over these policies. And Joe Biden and many Democrats have advocated for them for some time, all the while running their traps about systemic racism, which, by the way, Black people are far more likely to be charged with this kind of gun crime. And they receive larger sentences by, I think, 20% when they are charged with these kinds of gun crimes. So I think Hunter should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I think he should serve time. And I think if you have a problem with that, Joe Biden, then you better get your butt out there and start working to change these laws and start getting these people out of jail and prison that are sitting there right now for things you advocated for and that your very son was doing, because you have the power as executor in chief to start exonerating people and getting them out. But I don't see that energy anywhere from this administration.
Maybe it will if Hunter gets convicted or whatever.
Start a landslide where he just starts letting everybody out for this one particular crime. I mean, that's what you could
or
expect.
Or literally just pardon Hunter.
Ugh. It's a sorry place for your country to be. It really is. And I understand why people are so furious over the Hunter Biden.
But that's what I meant when I said I have mixed feelings about Hunter Biden, because I don't really think he did anything wrong. I mean, I don't think people should use crack cocaine, but I'm saying, like, owning a gun while also being a drug user, I don't think he did anything morally wrong there. But it is the law, and everyone else gets enforced. So it's hard for me. It's like, do I want to see him suffer for that when I don't actually think he did anything wrong? But that is the law, and he shouldn't get double standards from everyone else. That's what I have mixed feelings about.
Yeah, and I guess it's not fair for me to want somebody to suffer for the crimes of their father, but I can't say that I don't. Like, I think that Joe Biden deserves to watch his son go to jail for these kinds of things that he's backed. And I think that everybody else on the left watching this kind of thing go down better start checking themselves on their gun control advocacy, because all you end up doing for the most part is locking up innocent Black people when you claim to care about systemic racism. So tell this to all the Karens sitting in the Colorado Capitol right now. This is what the end result of your advocacy gets to. Okay, we got to move along because I get heated on these kinds of things and I don't want to say anything else. So I want to move on to a new study from the Cato Institute, and they have some very depressing results when it comes to the public sentiment towards privacy. According to reports, the new Cato survey found nearly a third of Gen Z support the government installing surveillance cameras in every household to prevent crime and abuse. Stab me in the heart. As somebody who I would list privacy concerns in my top 5 of issues, I've been popping off about the Patriot Act since I was like 13 years old. What? Are they not reading 1984 in schools anymore? Are they just so indoctrinated by the prevalence of technology all around them? Are they just such NPC sheep to not understand that the government is not your friend or nanny? It is your biggest enemy. I don't understand.
I think it's a couple things. I think it's the culture of having grown up with Snapchat and TikTok and feeling like everything's so public and online already that you don't then value privacy. And I also think it's uneducation or being uneducated about history and about how it's not just the bad guys who get targeted or abused. I mean, MLK was targeted by the FBI, but they do have a lot of time, this very naive, well, I have nothing to hide approach. First off, there's so many laws in this country that aren't necessary, that you probably do have something to hide. Yeah. You just don't know it. But also, even if you're not actually doing anything wrong, it would require a great deal of ignorance or naivete to believe that the government only ever goes after people who did something wrong.
Mm-hmm. And I remember when the Patriot Act was enacted all the way till I was in college, me having the debate, and keep in mind, this is pre me being all that involved in politics, but I was very passionately against the Patriot Act. And I remember people saying, both my age and my elders saying to me, like, I don't have anything to hide. I'm not involved in terrorist activity, so I have nothing to fear. And despite the fact that we now have decades worth of data to show you very much did have something to fear, that they were greatly expanding the powers of the Patriot Act to spy on you, whether or not you had anything to do with terrorism or even speaking to foreign nationals, despite the fact that we are learning day in, day out about just how many wrongful convictions there are in the criminal justice system, just how often agencies like the FBI will work with the media to make up things about people and try to paint them as criminals when they're not. Despite all of that body of evidence, we still end up here. We're in the age of information. As young people, you're on TikTok, you're online more than any other generation. You're more privy to be informed about the realities of that than any other generation. And yet this is a mentality we see. And it says to me that we're really failing to educate the younger generation. And it's not just Gen Z, right? The study, the worst is Gen Z, but we tend to kind of attack Gen Z without attacking the parents who are responsible for raising and making them smart people, or looking at the generations in between. And the study also found that millennials are actually almost as submissive. 20% of millennials between the ages of 30 and 44 also want everybody to be watched. And among Americans 45 and older, the support dwindles, but it's still around 6%.
So that doesn't bother me because you can get 6% to agree to anything.
So maybe it's a sliding trajectory as people age. Their brain fully forms and they become more aware of this. But the millennial demographic is really concerning to me. Lastly, they also found that there were political disparities in this data, which I don't think will surprise anybody. But they found that 19% of liberals and 18% of centrists agree that our daily lives ought to be captured on camera for our own safety, whereas amongst conservatives, those numbers were quite small. So yeah, you do see more people on the left and middle being open to this. And I mean, conservatives have their problem. Look, Brad and I, we criticize Republicans every bit as much as we do the left, I think, and actually sometimes more stringently because we expect more out of them. But when it comes to civil liberties, the right is holding the line at this point.
They're literally like, oppress me, daddy.
Yeah, they are. It's crazy town to me. And to me, what's so interesting is like you look at where the Democrats were in the early 2000s and even the Obama era to now, to see such an about face on these kinds of issues. It's what's so strange to me because within that time frame, we're dealing with the same body of people, right? This isn't over time, generations coming and them slowly moving the parties in different directions. Like, no, these are the same people that were there. People who were millennials or Gen X or boomers, they were Democrats in the early 2000s, just as probably most of them are now. Most people don't leave their affiliation. So I think that's what's interesting is that you went from being very concerned about these things. And what that says to me is you were never really concerned about them on their face like I was. You just cared with what the party was telling you to care about at a given moment. And you were opposed to the opposite party in power, which at the time was Republican George W. Bush. You didn't like George W. Bush, so you were anti-war, anti-civil liberties violations. But as soon as somebody on the left was doing it, and let's be clear, Obama was just as bad, if not worse than Bush on all of these facets, they didn't care anymore. And I think they've just quit looking or paying attention to it ever since.
All right, on to the mailbag. This first comment is, we usually do YouTube comments, but I included this one from Facebook because I found it funny. It's from Eddie, and he says, Brad loves big government until it infringes on his gay background. Typical libtard.
Yeah? What? That's not an argument. That's nothing to being a
Also, I don't think I posted this and I sarcastically wrote, Eddie knows me so well, like known defender of big government.
You never defend big government, but even if you were to, obviously anybody's going to start hating big government when it starts infringing on their very core of who they are. Like that's what man, you are so twisted up in your logic here, dude. Somebody else said something to me in my comments about you. And I think you get this too. We don't even tell each other most of the time because we both deal with so much just negativity and trolls. Like I think we both kind of keep things from one another, but people will sometimes complain to me about you or say things about you in my comments. And it boils my blood probably more than when they say things about me. And somebody recently was like claiming you shared my article on Black Lives Matter, I think is what it was. And they were trying to claim like you were a big government shill, that you were like a left-leaning libertarian. And I just was like, if you genuinely listen to Brad and come away thinking that he is left-leaning, you need a poli-sci 101 class. Like you can have issues with things that you think or policy positions you take, but anybody trying to claim that you like big government or that you're on the left, you're not even informed enough about basic political theory to be in this conversation. Log off.
Demented.
Just crazy. All right. Next comment says, sometimes bad things happen because you're stupid. Those are words to live by. Yes, they are. I saw this quote years ago. I think that's what they're referring to. I said this on the podcast a week or so ago. But I'd gone through a bad breakup and I was just really like questioning, like, why did this happen to me? And I saw this t-shirt that was like, sometimes bad things happen because you're stupid and you make bad choices. And I was like, oh, yeah, I think that's probably what is going on here. So
it is accurate. Tough but fair. So Kieran says, has Brad not been sleeping well? It looks like there's these huge bags under his eyes, or is that just a part of his face, like the genetic sunken eyes? I think it's partly genetic. It's partly like I always have bags under my eyes, kind of as just how my skin or my face is. But then when I'm paler, they're much more visible. And then sometimes if I don't sleep well on a given night or something, they are. But when I get a tan and I get decent sleep, then it's not. But I also don't wear makeup.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
you don't wear makeup. Most people wear makeup when they're under extreme lighting, which we are to film. And
yeah, that's one reason they might look exaggerated. There's an extremely bright light shining right down into my face right now. So try it.
If I didn't have on makeup, I would also have dark circles under makeup and a good bit of filler in my cheeks. But, that's beside the point. Gailey, I think is how you say her name, said, please keep making these. I look forward to them every week. We love to hear that.
We will. Kimberly says student loans and medical bankruptcy shouldn't be a thing. I mean, what this person means is that they should be human rights and paid for by the government. But I guess I see this sentiment a lot, like nobody should be denied a living wage or anything. And it's just like, okay, but we don't live in a world of should. We live in a world of reality and scarcity and not enough for everyone to have everything they want and all roses and puppies. And it's like just waxing poetic about how things shouldn't be like this. Well, if they are, you got to grapple with real solutions, not your pie in the sky notions about how everyone should have everything for free and it will just all somehow materialize, even though nobody will get to work and keep what they earn. So they won't actually work. That's not right, not smart, not a good take.
I disagree that everybody even deserves a living wage. Some people don't. If you don't want to work, you don't want to contribute, I don't think you do deserve a living wage. Why should you? You think you should have slaves and have people wait on you. If that's your mentality, that makes you a bad person. And I don't feel sorry for you. When it comes to things like student loans or medical bankruptcy, I would agree. Nobody should have medical bankruptcy. And I'd argue nobody would have medical bankruptcy if the government got the heck out of the healthcare market and let the free market actually start to work some good within it. When it comes to student loans, though, I mean, I think most people wouldn't need to take on student loans if the government got out of the higher education market. But to say that nobody should have them, I think that what you're actually saying is nobody should have the opportunity if they can't afford to pay for something to take out a loan and work to pay it back. And I think that's really silly.
Or alternatively, you're saying that taxpayers should be forced to pay for you to get a degree that will on average make you earn $1.2 million more over your lifetime. I hold the radical stance that you should probably pay for that yourself, actually. And if loans are how you have to do it, then so be it.
Yeah, I see nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Matt says, listening to Brad has made me gay. Why didn't you warn me it would be so expensive? Brad, are you out here flipping people?
I guess so.
Oh my goodness. What's so expensive about it?
The it's got to be the iced coffee. And the eyebrow waxing.
Yeah.
Andy says, I respect you guys a lot, and while I'm closer to the Democrats, I always like your opinions. However, I find it very troubling that you would advocate for Republicans to use the debt ceiling as a bargaining chip. You talk a lot about each side needing to watch out for things swinging the other way. This is no exception. What happens the next time Democrats control the House and want reparations or full student loan forgiveness? The debt default is just too scary of a possibility, and while our spending is scary, there's a lot of nuance to it and what has the biggest impact on inflation, let alone the consequences that would happen when we default, since we all know politicians won't default for one day. So what I would say, I have a couple thoughts on this. One, I do agree with you. Like, we would probably be pretty critical if Democrats were pushing for student loan forgiveness in order to raise the debt ceiling or something. But that's because it's not actually related to the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is directly related to our out of control spending. Why do we need to raise the debt ceiling? Because our Congress has been spending trillions of dollars more than we have and running up massive debt to bury future generations. So I think it's fair. That's why I liked some of the outcomes, but I think Republicans should have ditched the unrelated policy stuff they fought for in the deal. And they should have just demanded spending cuts, because it's fair to demand spending cuts. It's not necessarily fair as a matter of politics to demand unrelated partisan agenda items in a debt ceiling deal. And so I do think neither side should really do that. But I think it's totally fair to demand spending cuts, because that's like saying, let's give you a blood transfusion, but not stop the bleeding from your wound. Right? It's like you're not addressing the root of the problem that you're papering over. So I disagree with that. I mean, you're well taken, and I'm glad you listen, even though you have a different perspective than us. But that's why I view it differently.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we wouldn't like it if Democrats did that. I think it's inevitable that they will do that. But I agree with what you just said, Brad, and I think I guess I take the long view on it, which is that we're just kicking the can down the road. To me, there is a inevitability to all of this, that if we don't get control of spending, if we don't find a meaningful way to get control of the debt, we are going to go bankrupt. We are going to have a fiscal calamity on our hands. It is going to be extremely detrimental. And so while it might be painful to deal with right now, there might be negative consequences. I'm somebody that looks reality in the face and deals with it. And I think that's what our politicians should do. And that's why I'm disappointed that Republicans didn't fight harder to really get a hold of spending, because we can't just keep allowing it to come up the next year and the next year and the next year without anything ever moving in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to our hot takes. Brad, I have a food one this week. And that is that Americans, or at least every American I know, has been sleeping on chicken thighs. You always get sold chicken breast, chicken legs. I don't think I've ever eaten chicken thigh in my life, and I did it accidentally the other week. I went to Trader Joe's, which you know I love, and they have a lot of these like meat selections that are sort of pre-seasoned, and you just buy them, put in your oven, and heat it up. I bought this one thinking it was like pork, but it ended up being chicken thigh. And so when I noticed that, I was like, oh, I don't even know if I want to eat this. That sounds sus. But I went ahead and cooked it just to see, and it ended up being the most delightful piece of chicken I've ever had in my life. It was juicy, it was moist, it didn't have that like dry blandness chicken often has. It was delightful. And so I started Googling, like, are other people eating chicken thigh? And just nobody's ever talked to me about it. And turns out there's a huge community of people who love chicken thigh, but I don't know, is it a white people thing? Are white people not eating chicken thighs?
So I eat it all the time because
you do? It's a Southern thing, maybe.
So the reason I eat it is because I make a lot of slow cooker meals, and thighs, they don't get as dry as chicken breasts. Now, the flip side is thighs are not as healthy as chicken breasts. They're more fatty. But
everything good is more fatty. So.
Yeah, but they soak up sauce more. They don't get as dried out. I'm a huge fan of chicken thighs. In fact, we probably eat them as much or more than breasts in my house, because now I'm basically a trad wife at this point. I like have dinner. I have dinner like roasting the aroma, cooking all day when my boyfriend comes home from the hospital. So I've been making dinner 4 or 5 nights a week. So yeah,
you guys are so cute.
My hot take is that I've been finding these extraordinarily immature YouTube prank videos very funny. I've been watching. There's this guy, TJ Breeze, and he basically does like really immature stuff. He's like 20 something, but he acts like he's 14. He'll like go up to random people, and he lives in Indiana, which is a one-party consent state, so he can record people without asking them for permission, which is perhaps unethical, but he goes up to random people and he'll be like, hey, can you help me open this? I can't get it open. It's a Pringle jar. And then they open it and it just like pops out at them and he records their reactions. Or like he'll connect to the speaker in a store and start like playing fart noises. And then like just the most immature things, but then it's just really funny somehow to me. And then what's also funny is that most of them also turn into Karen videos, because you know some employee or some mom there will take it on themselves to like they all think that they have the right to not be recorded if they don't want to be, because they don't know the law. So they'll say, stop recording me, and then if they don't, they'll like assault him and try to grab the camera, and then they'll call the police, and then they'll get arrested because they assaulted him. It's it turns into these Karen standoffs often. And then he does this weird thing where like when male Karens, like old men or dads, are like aggressive towards him, he like flirts with them to make them uncomfortable. It's really incredibly immature, but I've been getting a lot of entertainment value about it, and I think that's, even though it's borderline unethical, I'm here for it.
I don't think so. I think people need to get a sense of humor again. There is a girl, I'm so sad I cannot think of her name right now. You might know it. I think I sent either you or my sister the video, and one of you was like, oh my gosh, I love this girl. But she started coming on my timeline on TikTok, and she does this stick where she'll be like, excuse me, kind sir, can you take a photo of me? And she'll hand them her iPhone, but it's recording TikTok. And then she'll turn around and just do something crazy. Like the one I saw, she was on a beach and she asked this guy to take a picture of her, and he's like, yeah, sure. So and she's like, just hold it down. And then she turns around, starts making dinosaur noises, and lunges, like crawls at this group of people.
Yes, I've seen this, yes.
And scares them to death. I laughed till I cried. She has like tons of videos like that. And it is, I don't know. To me, I think we need more of that in society. Everybody's too serious all the time. They take themselves too seriously. I love a good prank. I think they're quite funny. So you'll have to send me some of this, guys. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple. We will read it on air, or leave us some comments in the YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. If they're good enough, we'll bring them up too. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and until next week, stay based.